Welcome to the learning program of Centurion University of Technology and Management. I am Dr. Madhumita Das. Today's class, we will be discussing perfect competition and pareto optimality. In previous classes, we have discussed what is perfect competition, how a firm in a perfectly competitive market tries to maximize profit, how the industry in a perfectly competitive market behaves, what are the short run and long run pricing mechanism. One of the most remarkable features, if we take the last decade, one of the most remarkable features has been rediscovery of the market. Many countries, they have abandoned the heavy-handed intervention of government command and regulation for the decentralized coordination of the invisible hand. Having reviewed the basic operation of competitive market, first question is how well they perform. Are they actually competitive? Do they deserve high grades for satisfying people's economic needs? Is society getting many guns and much butter for a given amount of input? Or does it that butter melt on the way to the store while the guns have crooked barrels? This session, we will provide an overview of the efficiency of the competitive markets. Efficiency is one of the central concepts in all of the economics. In a general sense, an economy is efficient when it provides its consumers with the most desired set of goods and services given the resources and technology of the economy. So when we talk of efficiency, efficiency means that almost all the consumers' demand are met given the resources and technology of the economy. Economic efficiency is different from engineering efficiency. And sometimes it will be economical to use a production method that is less efficient from an engineering point of view. Let's take an example. Suppose physics shows that more energy can be converted to electricity if combustion occurs at 2500 degrees Celsius than at 1000 degrees Celsius. Yet, the higher temperature might require exotic metals and designs, and as a result, they will cost more. So, the lower temperature would be economically efficient, even though the higher temperature would have higher thermodynamic efficiency. A more precise definition uses the concept of pareto efficiency. This is the concept of pareto efficiency, which is alternatively called allocative efficiency. An economy can achieve this pareto efficiency when it is providing all the consumers the desired set of goods and services given the resources and technology of the economy. So we can also say pareto optimality, pareto efficiency, or sometimes simply efficiency. Pareto efficiency occurs when no possible reorganization of production or distribution can make anyone better off without making someone else worse off. This means that if production is happening, there is no possible reorganization of production which can make at least one better off. But if we want to make one better off, there can be someone who will be worse off. So if the situation is pareto efficient, then no possible reorganization of production or even distribution can make anyone better off without making someone else versa. Under conditions of allocative efficiency, one person's satisfaction or utility can be increased by lowering someone else's utility. So if the situation is pareto efficient, then this reorganization is not possible. We can think of the concept of efficiency intuitively in terms of the production possibility frontier. We had discussed in explaining the production possibility frontier or PPF. We have shown, say, if there are two commodities, suppose in a war situation, a country can use its resources to produce guns and butter. And we have shown how PPF shows what is the maximum amount of butter that the economy can produce given no butter is produced, and what is the maximum amount of butter that can be produced given the situation that no gun is produced. And between these two extremes, if we want to produce butter more, then the production of butter has to come down. So there will be options which can give different combinations of butter and gun. We can explain this PPF. Let me, I'll draw this figure. Let me share a screen where we can draw this PPF. So here with I'm sharing a Word file. So we'll draw the diagram PPF, the production possibility frontier, just to recapitulate what we had discussed. So this is, say, y-axis. Then I'll take x-axis. So this y-axis will show the maximum production of, say, gun. So what we can do is, this is the guns production. So let me write it guns, and this is butter. So I'm here writing butter. Say this is the one where I will show how this guns and butter, they provide us the PPF. So let me take this point. Say if I have, so this is my PPF, and this boundary, this is the maximum. So this point is my maximum, say point here. This is the point. I will just draw this just to highlight what is the point here. So this point, this shows the maximum amount of guns that can be produced, and this point which shows the maximum amount of butter that can be produced. And in all combinations in this line, all the combinations, they can have different amounts of gun and butter. If I want to produce more guns, production of butter has to come down. Why is that? Because resources are scarce. And any point on the PPF, they show the different combinations of butter and gun given the resources and technology. An economy is clearly inefficient if it is inside PPF. So if it is, any economy is producing, say, anywhere inside this PPF, so that is economically inefficient. So if I have, say, some economy is producing, say, for example, here, anywhere here, that shows it is economically inefficient. Similarly, the economy cannot go even here. Why? Because resources are not available. But all the points on the PPF, all the points on the production possibility frontier, they show the economic efficient amount of production. If we move out to PPF, no one needs suffer a decline in utility. And at a minimum, An efficient economy is always on its PPF, that is, on the production possibility frontier. But efficiency goes further and requires not only that the right mix of goods be produced, but also these goods be allocated among consumers to maximize consumer satisfaction. So this is the PPF and how efficiency, the economic efficiency can be discussed with the help of PPF. I'll go back again to my slide where we were discussing the case of pareto efficiency. And under conditions of allocative efficiency, one person's satisfaction or utility can be increased only by lowering someone else's utility. So if we want to achieve pareto efficiency, in that case, pareto efficiency shows that if no reorganization of production or distribution can make anyone better off without making someone else worse off. One of the most important results in all economics is that allocation of resources by perfectly competitive market is efficient. And this important result assumes that all markets are perfectly competitive when there are no externalities like pollution or imperfect competition. So we start with the discussion of efficiency of competitive equilibrium. So we assume that the there is market which is perfectly competitive market, and then there are no externalities, whether it is pollution or imperfect information. So the market is perfectly competitive. Perfect competition means it's the world of price takers. In a perfectly competitive market, a farm sells a homogeneous product which is identical to the product sold by all the farms in the industry. And this one is so small relative to its market that it cannot affect the market price. So that is why we say that the farm is simply a price taker and not a price maker. So if, say, for example, in a market where a farmer sells homogeneous product like wheat, that means the farmer is selling to a large pool of buyers at the market price. How the market price is determined? It is determined by the interaction of the market demand and the market supply. Let's take a very simplified example to generate this, to discuss these principles which are underlying the efficiency of competitive market. So let's consider a very idealized situation. We'll take this a situation where there are three assumptions. We are taking this assumption and the situation is considered to be very ideal. All individuals are identical. So this is one, that it is a very idealized situation. There we assume that each person works at growing food. Now, if each person works at growing food, as people increase their work and cut back on their leisure hours, each additional hour of sweaty labor becomes increasingly tiresome. But we assume that each person works at growing food. The second assumption is that each extra unit of food consumed brings diminishing marginal utility. So as there is extra unit of food produced and once it is consumed more, again, the diminishing marginal utility operates. And assumption 3, because food production takes place on fixed plots of land, so by law of diminishing returns, each extra minute of work brings less and less extra food. So these are the three assumptions. The first assumption, each person works at growing food. Second one, each extra unit of food consumed brings diminishing marginal utility. And the third point, because food is produced in fixed plot of land, so each extra minute of work brings less and less extra food. So let's explain it diagrammatically. Now, this is the competitive equilibrium point. We are discussing there is a demand curve and there is a supply curve. We have discussed this in setting up the equilibrium price in a perfectly competitive market. Let's look at this figure very closely. It shows supply and demand for our simplified competitive economy. If we sum horizontally the identical supply curves of our identical farms, so we say that every person is growing food. So all the identical farmers, if we add the supply curves, we get the upward stepping MC curve, marginal cost curve. And this cost curve, marginal cost curve, also becomes industry's supply curve. So this figure you see, the figure shows MC is equal to SS. Marginal cost curve is equal to SS, or the supply curve of the industry. Now let's look at the other side, that is MU, that is the marginal utility curve. How we figure out this? The demand curve is the horizontal summation of all the identical individuals. They are marginal utility curves. So if we horizontally add the supply curves or the marginal cost curves of the farmers, we get the supply curve. Similarly, by adding horizontally the demand curves of all the identical individuals, we get the marginal utility curve, which is also the demand curve for food. The intersection of the supply curve and the demand curve that shows the competitive equilibrium for food. So this is the intersection point is happening at point E. This point, farmers supply exactly what consumers want to purchase at the equilibrium market price. Each person will be working up to the critical point where the declining marginal utility of consuming food, this curve, intersects with the rising marginal cost of growing food curve. Now this figure shows a new concept also. What is that? That is the concept of economic surplus. And this is the area between the supply and demand curves at the equilibrium. Now let's see. So if I show, now to buy this, the consumer is willing, is ready to pay the price B. But what exactly the consumer is paying? The consumer is paying price P. So we have discussed the case of consumer surplus. It is the difference between what the consumer actually pays and what is the consumer willing to pay. So the consumer is willing to pay OB price, but the consumer is actually paying price P. So this is the equilibrium price, which is paid by the consumer. But on the other hand, the consumer is ready to pay the difference here. So this difference, B and P. So this is the amount of consumer surplus for point here. Similarly, for the first unit, the consumer is ready to pay this price, whereas the consumer again pays OP price. So this is the consumer surplus. For third one, the consumer is ready to pay here, but price is fixed at OP. Similarly, if we see all the points, this complete area becomes the consumer surplus. So this is where the consumer surplus we get. Why? Because up to this, the consumer is ready to pay a higher price, but on the other hand, consumer pays only price this. So let us see what is the other side from the producer's point of view. Now the producer is ready to sell at this price, at price A. The producer is ready to sell at price A. On the other hand, what is the price that the producer is charging? The producer is charging price OP. So OP is the maximum price which is charged, whereas the supplier is already ready to supply at OA price. So what is again the difference between this? Similarly, if we add all these points, we get a producer surplus like this area. So this is the area of producer surplus, and this is the area of consumer surplus. Okay, so by adding this producer surplus and consumer surplus, we are actually getting economic surplus. So this figure, apart from explaining the competitive market equilibrium, is also showing the concept of economic surplus. This is the sum of consumer surplus and the sum of producer surplus. So economic surplus, this is the area between the demand curve and the price line, and producer surplus, which is the area between the price line and the supply curve. Producer surplus includes rent, profit to farms, and owners of specialized inputs in the industry. That actually indicates the excess of revenue over cost of production. So what is the more amount that the producer is getting? And therefore, the economic surplus is the welfare or net utility gained from production and consumption of goods. So it includes consumer surplus. It also includes producer surplus. So economic surplus is the welfare or net utility gain from both production and consumption of a good. A careful analysis of competitive equilibrium will show that it maximizes economic surplus available in that industry. So for that reason, it is economically efficient. At the competitive equilibrium, we have the equilibrium point at E. So at the competitive equilibrium, this representative consumer will have higher utility of economic surplus than they would be possible with any other feasible allocation of resources. So if we see it from another perspective, another way of seeing the efficiency of the competitive equilibrium, we can see it by comparing the economic effect of a small change from the equilibrium at E. So the three-step process shows that marginal utility will be equal to price, will be equal to marginal cost. That is why the allocation is efficient. If price is equal to marginal utility, we have the curve. So this is marginal utility is equal to demand curve. So intersection of P is equal to marginal utility here. Similarly, when it is also intersecting the marginal cost curve, MU and MC are intersecting, where demand and supply are intersecting. So this E point, at this point E, price is equal to marginal utility. That means consumers choose food purchases up to the amount where price is equal to marginal utility. And as a result, every person is gaining P utils of satisfaction from the last unit of food consumed. Similarly, when we consider P is equal to marginal cost, as producers, each person is supplying food up to the point where price of the food is exactly equal the marginal cost of the last unit of food supply. So putting this two equation, price is equal to marginal utility, price is equal to marginal cost, we see that marginal utility is equal to marginal cost. This means that the utils gained, the utils means the utility received, the utils gained from the last unit of food consumed exactly equals the leisure utils lost from the time needed to produce that last unit of food. It is exactly this condition that the marginal gain to society from the last unit consumed equals the marginal cost to society of that last unit produced. This guarantees that a competitive equilibrium is efficient. Let's now turn this simple situation about farmers, consumers to an economy. Now, in an economy, we have not a single farmer and consumer. Okay, so in this is a very simple situation what we described. Now, if we populate this example to an economy, which is populated by millions of different farms, hundreds of millions of people, and several commodities. The question is, can a perfectly competitive economy still be efficient in this more complex world? Yes. The answer is, of course, yes. Why? Efficiency requires stringent conditions. These include having reasoned, well-informed consumers, perfectly competitive producers, and no externalities like pollution or incomplete knowledge. For such economies, a system of perfectly competitive market will earn the economist's star of Pareto efficiency. If we have, say, two consumers, suppose we take one demand curve of one and the another one demand curve, like we in this graph, we have only one demand curve and one supply curve. Similarly, if we have one person, there are suppose two persons, and if we horizontally, we add this two persons demand curve, we get the market demand curve. Similarly, by adding all individual supply curve, we get the market supply curve. And in the competitive equilibrium, demand will be equal with supply. So consumers, they get the quantity that they are willing to purchase of the good, that reflecting efficient social marginal cost. Similarly, the price allocates production efficiency among farms. Each farm, they set its output so that marginal cost becomes equal with price. Productive efficiency is achieved because there is no reorganization of production that would allow the same level of industry output to be produced at lower cost. Our economy produces not only food, clothing, but many other commodities. How does our analysis apply? When consumers choose among many products, the principles are exactly the same. Utility maximizing consumers spread their money among different goods until the marginal utility of the last rupee is equalized for each commodity. So MUA divided by price A is equal to MUB divided by price B, and so on. In this case, as long as the ideal conditions are met, a competitive economy is efficient with a multitude of goods and factors of production. That means a perfectly competitive economy is efficient when marginal private cost equals marginal social cost and when both equal marginal utility. So each industry must balance marginal cost and marginal utility. For example, if movies have 2 times the marginal cost of, say, pizza, then price and marginal utility of movies must also be twice of pizza. Only then will the marginal utilities which are equal to the price will be equal to the marginal costs. And by equating price and marginal cost, competition guarantees that an economy can achieve allocative efficiency. So when we say that how a perfectly competitive economy, when it is there are large number of producers, large number of consumers, how they can be efficient. The perfectly competitive market is actually a device for synthesizing the willingness of consumers, possessing dollar boards to pay for the goods, the marginal cost of those goods as represented by the farm supply curve, and under certain condition, competition guarantees efficiency, in which no consumer's utility can be raised without lowering another consumer's utility. This is true even in a world of many factors and products. So marginal cost is a benchmark for efficiency. So herewith we can stop. I'll summarize the points what we have discussed in this session. We discussed that the importance of marginal cost in attaining an efficient allocation of resources. But the importance of marginal cost extends far beyond perfect competition. Using marginal cost to achieve productive efficiency holds for any society or organization trying to make the most effective use of its resources, whether the entity is a capitalist or socialist economy, a profit maximizing or non-profit organization, or even a family. So the essential role of marginal cost is, if you have an objective that can be reached using several approaches, each of which is costly, in deciding how much of each approach to use, always do by equating marginal cost among different approaches. Only when the marginal costs are equalized, we squeeze the maximum from our scarce resources. The use of marginal cost as a benchmark for efficient resource allocation is applicable, remember, not just to profit maximizing firms, but to all economic problems. Indeed, to all problems that involves the problem of scarcity. So we discussed how in a market, in a perfectly competitive market, which is pareto optimal or pareto efficient, by using the marginal cost and marginal utility concept. So thank you very much and happy learning.